The courtroom was silent as Margaret Henderson's perfectly manicured finger pointed accusingly at the vintage fire truck parked in Jake Morrison's driveway. "Your Honor, this monstrosity violates every HOA regulation we have." Her voice dripped with self-righteous fury. Jake sat stone-faced, knowing this woman had already cost him $50,000 in legal fees over a truck that saved lives for 30 years. What Margaret didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in exactly 18 hours, her husband would be trapped in a burning house and the only thing standing between him and death would be the certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. That Jake Morrison would remember for the rest of his life. He stood in his kitchen, still in his bathrobe, coffee growing cold in his mug as he read the legal document that would turn his quiet retirement into a battlefield. Henderson versus Morrison. Civil Action Number 2024, CV, 8847. Plaintiff seeks immediate injunctive relief requiring defendant to remove non-conforming vehicle from residential property in violation of Covenant Section 12.3a. Jake's weathered hands trembled slightly as he set the papers down on his granite counter. Through his kitchen window, he could see the source of all this trouble sitting in his driveway like a faithful old dog, engine 419, a 1987 Pierce Arrow. Fire truck, gleaming red even in the pale morning light. 32 years he'd driven that truck. 32 years of racing toward danger while everyone else ran away. House fires, car accidents, medical emergencies, engine 419 had been his partner through it all. Now, 3 years into retirement, it was the one thing he'd refused to give up when the city replaced their fleet. "Not happening," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. The legal letterhead was expensive, intimidating. Margaret Henderson wasn't playing games. The doorbell rang with sharp, authoritative chimes. Jake cinched his bathrobe tighter and padded to the front door, already knowing who he'd find on the other side. Margaret Henderson stood on his porch like a general surveying conquered territory. At 55, she was all sharp angles and controlled fury, her silver hair pulled back in a bun so tight it seemed to lift her eyebrows. Her pursed lips and narrowed eyes had struck fear into the hearts of homeowners across Willowbrook Estates for the better part of a decade. "Mr. Morrison." She didn't wait for an invitation, stepping past him into his foyer. "I trust you received my attorney's correspondence." "Lady, it's 7:30 in the morning. The law doesn't keep bankers' hours." Margaret's gaze swept his living room with barely concealed disdain. "Neither does property value depreciation." Jake closed the door harder than necessary. "Margaret, we've been over this. The truck stays." "The truck," she said, pronouncing each word like it tasted bitter, "is a commercial vehicle. Commercial vehicles are expressly prohibited in residential driveways under Section 12 of our covenants. You signed those covenants, Mr. Morrison. They are legally binding. It's not commercial. It's retired. It's my property." Margaret's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Your property. Mr. Morrison, when you bought your house in Willowbrook Estates, you agreed to maintain certain standards. Standards that preserve our community's character and, more importantly, our property values." She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through photos. "Do you see this? This is what prospective buyers see when they drive down Maple Street. A fire truck. In a residential neighborhood. It's like having a garbage truck parked next to the mailbox." Jake's jaw tightened. "That truck saved more lives than you've probably touched in your entire, I don't care if it saved the Pope himself," Margaret snapped. "It doesn't belong here. And thanks to this eyesore, the Kowalskis received an offer $15,000 below asking price last month." $15,000, Mr. Morrison. How many lives is that worth? You can't put a price on, everything has a price. And right now, your nostalgia is costing your neighbors money." Margaret tucked her phone away and smoothed her blazer. "I've tried to handle this diplomatically. I've sent letters. I've made phone calls. I've been patient. But my patience has limits." Jake studied her face, noting the way her mouth formed a thin line, the cold calculation in her eyes. "Margaret." Henderson didn't just want compliance, she wanted victory. Total, humiliating victory. "The court hearing is scheduled for next Friday," she continued. I strongly suggest you use that time to make arrangements for the truck's removal. My attorney is confident we'll receive a favorable ruling. And if I don't? Margaret's smile was arctic. Then you'll be in contempt of court. Fines. Penalties. Possible jail time. She paused, letting the words sink in. Is a rusty old truck really worth destroying your retirement over? Jake felt heat rising in his chest. Rusty. Lady, that truck has been maintained better than most people maintain their marriages. Every system checked, every component serviced. That rusty old truck could roll out of here right now and fight fires until the day it dies. How quaint. Margaret's voice dripped condescension. But this isn't about functionality, Mr. Morrison. This is about community standards. About respect for your neighbor's investments. Respect. Jake's voice rose. You want to talk about respect? I spent 3 decades risking my life for this community. I've pulled people out of burning buildings, performed CPR in the middle of the night, talked suicide jumpers off bridges. And now you want to take away the one thing that represents all of that because it hurts your property values. Margaret's expression didn't change. Your service is noted and appreciated. But it doesn't give you the right to violate neighborhood covenants. Those covenants are bullshit. Those covenants are the foundation of civilized society, Margaret shot back. Without rules, without standards, we'd be living in chaos. Look around you, Mr. Morrison. Look at what we've built here. Clean streets. Manicured lawns. Proper setbacks. Home values that have increased 40% in the last 5 years. That doesn't happen by accident. Jake looked through his front window at the neighborhood Margaret had helped create. Every house was a variation on the same theme, colonial revival, craftsman, or contemporary, but all sanitized, all safe, all approved by committee. The lawns were indeed perfect, chemical green carpets that probably cost more to maintain than most people's cars. The driveways were spotless, the mailboxes uniform, the landscaping professionally designed. It was beautiful in its own way. It was also sterile as a hospital room. You know what's missing from your perfect neighborhood? Jake asked quietly. I can't imagine. Soul. Margaret's laugh was bitter. Soul doesn't pay mortgages, Mr. Morrison. Soul doesn't fund retirement accounts. Soul doesn't put children through college. She moved toward the door, then paused. You have until Friday to make your decision. Remove the truck voluntarily, or have it removed for you. Those are your options. Jake followed her to the door. There's a third option. Which is fight. Margaret turned back to him, and for the first time, Jake saw something besides cold calculation in her eyes. He saw genuine surprise, as if the possibility of resistance had never occurred to her. Mr. Morrison, she said slowly, I've been president of this HOA for 8 years. I've handled dozens of covenant violations. Pool installations without permits. Fence disputes. Unapproved paint colors. Oversized garbage cans. I've never lost a case. Not once. There's a first time for everything. Not this time. Margaret's voice was steel wrapped in silk. You have no idea what you're up against. I have resources. I have connections. I have the law on my side. What do you have? Jake thought about that for a moment. What did he have? A pension that was smaller than he'd hoped. A house that was too big for one person. A few friends from the department who called less and less frequently. And a fire truck that most people saw as an outdated relic. I have the truth, he said finally. Margaret's smile was pitying. The truth, Mr. Morrison, is whatever the judge says it is. And judges tend to side with properly prepared legal arguments, not sentimental stories about the good old days. She stepped onto the porch, then turned back one final time. There's something else you should know. This isn't just about your truck anymore. Word has gotten out about our little dispute. The neighborhood is watching. If I back down now, if I let one person thumb their nose at the covenants, it opens the floodgates. Next month it'll be someone else with a boat trailer. The month after that, an RV. Before you know it, Willowbrook Estates looks like a trailer park. God forbid people actually live in their own homes. God forbid property values collapse and everyone loses their life savings because one selfish man refused to follow the rules. Margaret's voice rose and Jake saw a flash of genuine anger beneath her controlled exterior. Do you think I enjoy this? Do you think I wake up every morning excited to be the neighborhood enforcer? I do this because someone has to. Because without people like me, communities fall apart. Jake watched her walk down his driveway, noting how she took a wide path around engine 419, as if the truck might somehow contaminate her. At the end of his driveway, she turned and looked back at the house, his house, and Jake could see her already calculating property values, already planning her next move. As Margaret's Mercedes disappeared around the corner, Jake walked back into his kitchen and picked up the legal papers. The LAN. David Chen's law office occupied the top floor of a glass tower downtown, all polished marble and intimidating leather-bound books. Jake sat in the waiting room, his calloused hands fidgeting with a coffee cup that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. The receptionist, a woman young enough to be his daughter, kept glancing at him with barely concealed curiosity, as if wondering what someone in a flannel shirt and work boots was doing in a place that charged $600 an hour. Mr. Morrison. David Chen appeared in the doorway, extending a hand. He was younger than Jake had expected, maybe 45, with the kind of confidence that came from winning cases other lawyers were afraid to take. Come in. Let's talk about your fire truck. Chen's office was a shrine to legal victories. Framed newspaper clippings covered one wall. Local attorney defeats corporate giant, HOA forced to pay damages, property rights victory sets precedent. Jake found himself feeling cautiously optimistic for the first time in days. I've reviewed the documents your opponent filed, Chen said, settling behind his desk. Margaret Henderson is thorough, I'll give her that. But she's also made some interesting mistakes. Such as? She's claiming your truck violates the commercial vehicle restriction, but the covenant defines commercial vehicles as those used in the course of trade or business. Your truck isn't being used for anything, it's essentially a very large collectible. Jake leaned forward. So we can beat this. Chen's expression grew more cautious. We can fight it. Whether we can beat it depends on several factors. First, the judge. Some are more sympathetic to property rights, others to community standards. Second, the HOA's enforcement history. If they've allowed other violations while singling you out, we might have a selective enforcement argument. They haven't allowed any violations. Margaret runs that place like a prison camp. Actually, that might work in our favor. Chen pulled out a thick folder. I had my investigator do some digging. In the past 5 years, your HOA has issued violation notices for grass exceeding 3 inches in height, mailboxes painted the wrong shade of black, holiday decorations left up past January 2nd, and someone's teenage son parking his Honda Civic in the driveway instead of the garage. Jake shook his head. You're kidding. I wish I were. The point is, your HOA has a pattern of aggressive enforcement. That suggests their action against you isn't about protecting property values, it's about control. How much is this going to cost me? Chen set down his pen. If we settle quickly, maybe 15 to 20,000. If we go to trial. He paused. Could be 50,000 or more, win or lose. Jake felt his stomach drop. Jesus. There's another option, Chen said quietly. We could file a countersuit. Harassment, selective enforcement, intentional infliction of emotional distress. If we win, they pay our legal fees. And if we lose, then you're looking at 100,000 in legal bills, minimum. Jake stood up and walked to the window. 20 floors below, the city sprawled out in all directions. Somewhere down there. His replacement trucks were probably responding to calls, saving lives, making a difference. He was up here arguing about parking spaces. Mr. Morrison, can I ask you something? Jake turned back. Shoot. Why is this truck so important to you? I mean, I understand the sentimental value, but is it really worth risking your financial Future. Jake was quiet for a long moment. How could he explain it? How could he make someone understand that Engine 419 wasn't just a vehicle, but a testament to everything he'd been, everything he'd accomplished? You ever save someone's life? Jake asked finally. Chen shook his head. It changes you. The first time, anyway. You realize that what you do matters in a way most people's work never will. That truck, it's not just metal and chrome. It's every life I saved, every family I helped, every moment I made a difference. The truck doesn't make you a hero. Mr. Morrison. You do. Maybe. But it's proof that I was one. Chen studied him for a moment, then nodded. Okay. We fight. As Jake left the lawyer's office, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. This is your last warning. Remove the truck or face the consequences. Jake stared at the message, then typed back, see you in court. The response came immediately, you have no idea what you're up against. Jake smiled grimly as he typed his final reply, neither do you. 3 days later, Jake was in his garage, polishing chrome that didn't need polishing, when his neighbor Bill Kowalski appeared in the doorway. Jake, we need to talk. Bill was a good man, a retired teacher who'd lived in the neighborhood for 12 years. He'd always been friendly, always waved when they passed on the street. But today he looked uncomfortable, almost apologetic. What's on your mind, Bill? It's about the truck. Bill stepped into the garage, his eyes avoiding Jake's. Look. I know this is awkward, but Margaret asked me to talk to you. Neighbor to neighbor. Jake set down his polishing cloth. Did she now? She's not the monster you think she is, Jake. Yeah, she's tough on the rules, but she's also the reason our property values have stayed strong while other neighborhoods have struggled. When the Petersons wanted to paint their house bright yellow, she stopped them. When the Johnsons tried to install that awful chain-link fence, she made them use wood instead. The woman's not perfect, but she gets results. At what cost? That's what I'm trying to tell you, there is no cost. Following the rules doesn't hurt anyone. It helps everyone. Jake picked up a wrench, testing its weight in his hand. Bill, how long have you lived here? 12 years. In 12 years, has your house ever caught fire? Bill looked puzzled. No. Has anyone in your family ever had a heart attack? A stroke? A serious accident? No, thank God. Then you've never needed someone like me. Jake set the wrench down carefully. But someday you might. And when that day comes, you'll want someone who gives a damn about more than property values. Bill's face reddened. That's not fair, Jake. We appreciate what you did. We all do. But that doesn't give you the right to ignore the rules the rest of us follow. Doesn't it? Jake's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. I spent 30 years risking my life for this community. I've crawled through smoke so thick I couldn't see my own hand. I've pulled children out of burning buildings. I've performed CPR on your neighbor's grandparents. And now you want to tell me I can't park my truck in my own driveway. It's not about what you deserve, Jake. It's about what's fair to everyone. Fair? Jake laughed bitterly. You want to know what's fair? Fair is when the community stands up for the people who protected it. Fair is when 30 years of service counts for something. Fair is when neighbors act like neighbors instead of corporate shareholders. Bill took a step back. I'm sorry you feel that way. Are you? Or are you just sorry that I'm not rolling over and making your life easier? Bill was quiet for a moment, then pulled out his phone. Margaret wanted me to show you this. The screen displayed a petition titled, Remove the Fire Truck from Willowbrook Estates. Below it were dozens of signatures, neighbors Jake had known for years, people he'd helped, people he'd considered friends. 87 signatures, Bill said quietly. Out of 94 households. Jake stared at the screen, feeling something cold settle in his chest. The Kowalskis had signed it. The Martinezes, whose daughter he'd driven to the hospital when she broke her arm. The Chens, whose elderly father he'd helped during a diabetic emergency. The Johnsons, the Petersons, the Williamses, all of them. Jesus, Jake whispered. I'm sorry, Jake. I really am. But this is bigger than just you and Margaret now. The whole neighborhood is watching. Jake handed the phone back. Get off my property. Jake, get off my property. Now. Bill left without another word, but Jake could see him through the window, standing in his own driveway, talking on his phone. Reporting back to Margaret, no doubt. Jake walked out to engine 419 and climbed into the cab. The afternoon sun was slanting through the windshield, warming the cracked vinyl seats. He closed his eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to be needed, to be respected, to matter. His phone rang. David Chen. Jake, I've got news. Good news and bad news. Give me the bad news first. They've accelerated the court date. The hearing is tomorrow morning at 9. Jake's heart sank. Tomorrow. I thought we had another week. Emergency injunction. Apparently, they are claiming the truck is creating a public safety hazard. Something about blocking sight lines for traffic. That's bullshit. Oh no. But the judge granted the motion. Which brings me to the good news. I'm listening. I found something interesting in the HOA's original filing documents. When Willowbrook Estates was developed, the city required the HOA to include a provision for emergency vehicle access. The covenant explicitly states that emergency vehicles are exempt from the commercial vehicle restriction. Jake felt a spark of hope. The truck's an emergency vehicle. Was an emergency vehicle. That's the key question, does retired equipment still count? I think I can make that argument, but it's going to depend on how the judge interprets the language. What are our chances? Honestly. 50-50. Maybe 60-40 if we get Judge Martinez. She's more sympathetic to individual property rights. And if we lose, then you'll have 24 hours to remove the truck, or they'll have it towed at your expense. Plus, you'll still be liable for. The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. Jake sat in the gallery, watching Margaret Henderson command the courtroom like a general directing troops. She'd arrived with 3 lawyers, 2 assistants, and a briefcase full of documents that would have impressed the Supreme Court. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her navy suit screamed expensive competence. Jake had David Chen and a prayer. All rise for the Honorable Judge Elena Martinez. Judge Martinez was a small woman with dark eyes that seemed to see everything. Jake had hoped Chen was right about her being sympathetic to property rights, but her expression gave nothing away as she reviewed the case file. This is a motion for emergency injunctive relief, Judge Martinez said, her voice carrying easily through the courtroom. Ms. Henderson, you may begin. Margaret's lead attorney, a shark in a $1,000 suit named Richard Blackwood, stood and approached the bench. Your Honor, this case is about the rule of law. When property owners purchase homes in a planned community, they enter into a social contract. They agree to follow certain standards in exchange for the protection of their investment. Blackwood gestured toward an easel where Margaret's assistant had mounted a large photograph of engine 419. The defendant's fire truck is not just a covenant violation, it's a direct assault on the rights of 93 other families who followed the rules they agreed to follow. Jake felt his jaw clench. Assault. As if his truck was a weapon. Furthermore, Blackwood continued, the defendant has shown a pattern of defiance and disregard for community standards. When approached diplomatically, he refused to comply. When served with legal notice, he responded with hostility. This is not a man who respects the law or his neighbor's rights. The attorney pulled out a stack of papers. Your Honor, I present 87 signatures from concerned residents requesting immediate removal of this vehicle. These are not strangers complaining about someone else's property, these are neighbors who have to live with the consequences of the defendant's selfishness. Jake watched Margaret during the presentation, noting how she sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. She wasn't just confident, she was certain. This was a woman who'd never lost a fight in her life. The emergency nature of this injunction is clear, Blackwood concluded. Every day this truck remains in violation, property values decline. Every day it sits there, it sends a message that rules don't matter, that contracts can be broken with impunity. We ask the court to order immediate removal of this vehicle and to award damages for the harm already done. Judge Martinez nodded. Mr. Chen, your response. David Chen stood slowly, and Jake noticed he looked smaller than he had in his office. The confidence that had seemed so reassuring yesterday was nowhere to be seen. Your Honor, this case is about more than property values. It's about what we owe to those who serve our community. Chen walked over to Jake, placing a hand on his shoulder. Mr. Morrison isn't just a homeowner, he's a 30-year veteran of the fire department. He's saved lives, protected property, and served with distinction. With respect, Your Honor, Blackwood interrupted, the defendant's service record, while admirable, doesn't give him the right to violate neighborhood covenants. Sustained, Judge Martinez said. Mr. Chen, please focus on the legal issues. Jake watched Chen's face fall slightly. Their strongest argument, Jake's service to the community, had just been ruled irrelevant. Your Honor, the HOA's own covenant provides an exception for emergency vehicles. Section 15.2 clearly states that emergency vehicles are exempt from the commercial vehicle restriction. The truck is no longer an emergency vehicle, Blackwood shot back. It's retired. It's no longer in service. But it's still functionally an emergency vehicle, Chen argued. It's fully equipped, fully maintained, and capable of responding to emergencies. Judge Martinez leaned forward. Mr. Chen, is the truck currently registered as an emergency vehicle? Chen hesitated for a fraction of a second, long enough for Jake to know the answer. No, Your Honor. It's registered as a personal vehicle. Then it's not an emergency vehicle under the law, is it? Your Honor, we believe the spirit of the covenant is clear, Blackwood interrupted. Rules apply to everyone equally. The defendant signed these covenants voluntarily. He's bound by them legally. Jake felt the case slipping away. Around him, the gallery was packed with his neighbors, all watching his public humiliation. He spotted Bill Kowalski in the third row, looking uncomfortable but determined. The Martinezes sat 2 rows behind him, whispering to each other. Even Mrs. Patterson, the elderly widow he'd helped with her groceries just last month, was there with her arms crossed, looking stern. Mr. Chen, Judge Martinez said, does your client have any plans to bring the vehicle into compliance? Chen looked back at Jake, who shook his head almost imperceptibly. No, Your Honor. Mr. Morrison believes he has the right to keep his truck on his own property, even if that property is subject to valid covenant restrictions. Your Honor, we believe those restrictions are being selectively and unfairly enforced. Blackwood was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, I have documentation of consistent enforcement. The HOA has issued violations for grass height, mailbox colors, holiday decorations, and numerous other infractions. They enforce the rules equally for everyone. Because they are petty tyrants, Jake muttered, loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. Mr. Morrison, Judge Martinez said sharply, you will remain silent or be removed from my courtroom. Jake felt his face burn with embarrassment. Even his own lawyer was giving him a warning look. Your Honor, Chen said, trying to recover, the HOA's enforcement pattern shows an obsession with minor infractions that has created a hostile environment for residents. This isn't about protecting property values, it's about control. The covenants exist to protect everyone's investment, Blackwood replied smoothly. Without enforcement, they are meaningless pieces of paper. Judge Martinez reviewed her notes for what felt like an eternity. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of the air conditioning and someone's nervous cough. This is a difficult case, she finally said. On one hand, Mr. Morrison's service to the community is commendable and deserves recognition. On the other hand, he voluntarily agreed to abide by neighborhood covenants when he purchased his property. Jake felt his heart sink. The law is clear, Judge Martinez continued. Covenant restrictions that are reasonable and uniformly enforced are legally binding. The defendant's truck, while admirable in its history, is currently classified as a personal vehicle and therefore subject to the commercial vehicle restriction. Your Honor, Chen said desperately, we request time to file additional briefs, motion denied. However, Judge Martinez raised her hand as Blackwood started to smile. "I'm troubled by the HOA's demand for immediate removal. Mr. Morrison has owned this truck for 3 years without complaint. The emergency nature of this injunction seems manufactured." Jake felt a flicker of hope. "Therefore, I'm granting a modified injunction. Mr. Morrison has 30 days to remove the vehicle or bring it into compliance with HOA covenants. If he fails to do so, the HOA may have it towed at his expense." Blackwood was on his feet. "Your Honor, 30 days is insufficient. The plaintiff has already suffered damages. 30 days, Mr. Blackwood. The court has spoken." Jake felt like he'd been punched in the gut. 30 days. After 3 years of peaceful coexistence, he had 30 days to say goodbye to Engine 419. Furthermore, Judge Martinez continued, "I'm denying the plaintiff's request for damages. While the defendant must comply with the covenants, I see no evidence of actual harm to property values." Margaret's face went white. She leaned forward to whisper something urgent to Blackwood, who nodded grimly. "Your Honor," Blackwood said, "the plaintiff requests immediate consideration of attorney's fees under the covenant's enforcement clause." Judge Martinez consulted her notes. "The covenant does provide for attorney's fees in successful enforcement actions. Mr. Morrison, you'll be responsible for the plaintiff's reasonable legal costs." Jake felt the world tilt. "How much?" "That will be determined at a separate hearing," Judge Martinez said. "But I'd estimate somewhere in the range of $30,000 to $40,000. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Jake heard someone behind him say, "Jesus," and another voice murmur, "Poor bastard." "Court is adjourned," Judge Martinez announced. As the gavel fell, Jake sat frozen in his chair. 30 days and $40,000. His entire retirement, gone. All for a truck that had done nothing but serve faithfully for 3 decades. Margaret Henderson walked past him on her way out, and Jake caught her eye. For just a moment, he saw something that might have been regret. But then her expression hardened and she continued past without a word. "Jake," Chen said quietly, "we need to talk about your options." "What options?" "I just lost everything." "Not everything. We can appeal, or we can negotiate. Maybe work out a payment plan for the attorney's fees." Jake stood up slowly, feeling every one of his 62 years. Around him, his neighbors were filing out, most avoiding eye contact. Only Bill Kowalski approached him. "Jake, I'm sorry. I really am." "Are you?" Jake's voice was flat. "Or are you just sorry it had to be so public?" Bill flinched. "You brought tea." Jake Morrison woke at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of sirens. Not unusual in itself, the new station was only 6 blocks away, and emergency calls were a constant soundtrack to urban life. But something about these sirens was different. More urgent. More desperate. He rolled out of bed and padded to his kitchen window, coffee mug in hand. Outside, Engine 419 sat in his driveway like a faithful dog, gleaming under the street light. 26 days left. 26 days until it would be gone forever. The sirens were getting closer, then suddenly they stopped. Jake frowned. They'd stopped somewhere in the neighborhood. He pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt and walked out to his front porch. Down the street, he could see the red and blue lights painting the night in urgent colors. Something big was happening. Jake climbed into his truck, his regular truck, not Engine 419, and drove toward the lights. What he found made his blood run cold. Margaret Henderson's house was on fire. Not just on fire, it was being devoured. Flames were shooting from the second-story windows, and thick black smoke was pouring from the roof. 3 fire trucks were already on scene, but Jake could see immediately that they were in trouble. The house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac. And the trucks couldn't get close enough to the structure. They were having to run hose lines nearly 200 feet, and the water pressure was inadequate. Jake parked and jogged toward the scene, his old instincts kicking in. He spotted Captain Rodriguez from Engine 12, barking orders into his radio. "Rodriguez!" Jake called out. The captain turned, and Jake saw relief flash across his face. "Morrison." "Thank God." We need every experienced hand we can get. What's the situation? Started about 20 minutes ago. Electrical fire in the basement. Spread faster than anything I've ever seen. The whole place is going up. Jake looked at the house. The flames had reached the roof now, and he could see them starting to spread to the attached garage. Everyone out. Rodriguez's face went grim. We got the woman out. Margaret Henderson. But her husband's still inside. Second floor, northeast bedroom. We can't reach him. Jake felt his stomach drop. Can't reach him. Stairs collapsed 10 minutes ago. We've got guys trying to get a ladder to the window, but the driveway's too narrow. The trucks can't maneuver. Jake looked at the scene with experienced eyes. The fire department's modern trucks were massive, designed for urban streets and wide suburban driveways. But Margaret's house was old, built when fire trucks were smaller and neighborhoods were more compact. The equipment that should have been saving lives was too big to do the job. Where's Margaret? Jake asked. Rodriguez pointed toward an ambulance parked at the mouth of the cul-de-sac. Smoke inhalation. She's conscious, but barely. Jake jogged over to the ambulance. Margaret was sitting on the back bumper, an oxygen mask over her face. Her expensive nightgown was torn and soot-stained, her silver hair wild with ash. When she saw Jake approaching, her eyes went wide with something that might have been hope or terror. Harold, she gasped, pulling the mask away from her face. He's still inside. Second floor. The bedroom on the right. Jake knelt down beside her. Margaret, how long has he been up there? I don't know. 20 minutes. 30. He was sleeping when the smoke detectors went off. I tried to wake him, but he's on medication. Sleep aids. He was so groggy. Tears were streaming down her face, cutting tracks through the soot. I couldn't get him up. I had to run. The fire was so fast. Jake looked back at the house. The second floor windows were starting to glow orange from the inside. Harold Henderson was running out of time. They can't reach him, Margaret continued, her voice breaking. The trucks are too big. The driveway's too narrow. They said they are going to try a ladder from the street, but... She grabbed Jake's arm with desperate strength. He's going to die in there. Jake stood up and looked at the scene again. Rodriguez was right, the modern trucks couldn't maneuver in the tight space. But Engine 419 could. It was smaller, more agile, designed for exactly this kind of situation. Margaret, Jake said quietly, I need you to listen to me very carefully. She looked up at him, her eyes red with smoke and tears. Engine 419 could reach him. It's small enough to get down your driveway, and it's got a ladder that could reach the second floor. Margaret's face went white. Your truck? But it's not in service. It's not legal. It's fully functional. I've maintained it perfectly. It could save Harold's life. Margaret stared at him for a long moment, and Jake could see the war playing out behind her eyes. Here was the man she'd spent months trying to destroy, offering to risk everything to save her husband. With a truck she'd argued had no place in their neighborhood. What are you saying? She whispered. I'm saying I can save him. But I need your permission. My permission? You're the HOA president. If I take that truck into service tonight, I'm violating the court order. I need to know you won't use it against me. Margaret looked at her burning house, then back at Jake. You want me to promise I won't sue you? After everything that's happened, I want you to decide what's more important. Your lawsuit or your husband's life. For a moment, Jake thought she might actually refuse. The woman who had spent months fighting him over property values and neighborhood standards was being asked to set all of that aside. To trust the man she'd tried to destroy. Do it, she said finally. Save him. Please. Jake was already running toward his truck before the words were fully out of her mouth. He drove the 6 blocks to his house in record time, jumped out, and sprinted to Engine 419. The truck started on the first try, its diesel engine rumbling to life like a sleeping giant awakening. Jake had driven this route 1,000 times in his career, but never like this. Never with this much at stake. The truck handled exactly like he remembered, responsive, reliable, built for emergencies. As he rounded the corner onto Margaret's street, he could see that the fire had gotten worse. The entire second floor was now engulfed. The other firefighters scattered as Jake maneuvered engine 419 down the narrow driveway. The truck fit with maybe 18 inches to spare on each side, but it fit. Jake positioned it directly under the northeast bedroom window and extended the ladder. "Morrison, what the hell are you doing?" Rodriguez shouted over the noise of the fire. "Saving a life," Jake called back as he started climbing. The ladder swayed slightly under his weight, but held firm. Jake had climbed this same ladder hundreds of times and muscle memory took over. At the window, he could see into the smoke-filled bedroom. Harold Henderson was on the floor beside the bed, unconscious but breathing. Jake smashed the window with his axe and climbed inside. The heat was overwhelming, like being inside an oven. Smoke burned his eyes and throat, but he pushed forward. Harold was a big man, probably 200 pounds, and dead weight from the medications. Jake hoisted him over his shoulder and started back toward the window. The trip down the ladder was the longest 30 seconds of Jake's life. Harold's weight made every step treacherous, and the heat from the fire below was getting more intense by the second. But engine 419's ladder held steady, and strong hands were waiting at the bottom to help. They got Harold to the ambulance just as the second floor collapsed. The bedroom where he'd been trapped disappeared in a shower of sparks and burning timber. Jake stood in the street, watching Margaret's house burn to the ground, feeling the adrenaline slowly drain from his system. Around him, firefighters were working to contain the blaze and prevent it from spreading to neighboring houses. But the Henderson home was a total loss. Margaret appeared at his side, still clutching her oxygen mask. She looked at the smoldering remains of her house, then at engine 419, still positioned in her driveway with its ladder extended. "He's going to be okay," she said quietly. "The paramedics said he'll be fine. Smoke inhalation, but nothing serious." Jake nodded. "Good." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the flames consume what was left of Margaret's perfectly maintained home. Finally, she spoke again. "I'm sorry." Jake looked at her. "For what?" "For everything. For the lawsuit. For turning the neighborhood against you. For..." She gestured at the burning house. "For being so blind that it took this to make me see what really matters." "Margaret, no, let me finish." She turned to face him fully. "You offered to give up everything to save a man whose wife has been trying to destroy you for months. You risked your own safety, your own future, for someone who's shown you nothing but hostility. That truck." She looked at engine 419, still faithfully positioned where Jake had left it. "That truck saved my husband's life. And I spent months trying to have it removed because it hurt my property values." Jake was quiet for a moment. "Property values don't matter much when your house burns down." Margaret's laugh was bitter and broken. "No. They don't." She looked at engine 419 again. "What happens now?" "With the court order, I mean. I violated it. Took the truck into service without authorization. You could have me arrested." "I could." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "Or I could drop the lawsuit." Jake stared at her. "Just like that. My husband is alive because of that truck. Because of you. How could I possibly continue fighting you after tonight?" Jake felt something ease in his chest for the first time in weeks. "What about the neighbors? The petition?" Margaret looked around at the crowd that had gathered to watch. 6 months later, Jake Morrison stood in his driveway, polishing the chrome on engine 419's front bumper. The autumn sun was warm on his back, and the maple trees that lined Willowbrook Estates were putting on their annual show of gold and crimson. It was the kind of perfect October morning that made you grateful to be alive. "Looking good, Jake." He turned to see Harold Henderson walking up the driveway, moving a little slower than he used to but very much alive. Harold was a quiet man, a retired accountant who'd always preferred his garden to neighborhood politics. The fire had changed him too, though in subtler ways than it had changed his wife. "Harold. Good to see you up and around." "Good to be up and around." Harold ran his hand along engine 419's side panel. "Mind if I take a look under the hood? I've been curious about the mechanics ever since." Jake popped the hood without hesitation. Harold had earned the right to examine every bolt and gasket on the truck. Over the past 6 months, he'd become something of a regular visitor, drawn by a mixture of gratitude and genuine fascination with the machine that had saved his life. "V8 diesel," Jake explained, pointing to various components. 400 horsepower, but built for torque, not speed. She's not fast, but she'll pull anything you need her to pull." Harold nodded appreciatively. "Margaret's always been about efficiency and performance. I think she finally understands that sometimes the old ways work better than the new ones." Jake smiled. Margaret Henderson had indeed changed, though the transformation hadn't been instant or easy. In the weeks following the fire, she'd thrown herself into HOA reform with the same intensity she'd once brought to covenant enforcement. The emergency board meeting had resulted in the Morrison Amendment to the Neighborhood Covenants, a provision that exempted retired emergency vehicles owned by former first responders from the commercial vehicle restriction. But Margaret hadn't stopped there. She'd pushed through additional amendments addressing fence heights, landscaping requirements, and holiday decoration restrictions. The new covenants still maintained neighborhood standards, but with flexibility and common sense. That had been missing before. "Speaking of Margaret," Harold said, "she wanted me to remind you about tonight." Tonight was the Willowbrook Estates annual community dinner, a tradition that had lapsed during Margaret's iron-fisted reign but was being revived as part of her effort to rebuild neighborhood unity. The dinner was being held in the community center, with every household invited to contribute a dish and share stories. "I'll be there," Jake said. "Wouldn't miss it." "Good. She's been nervous about it all week. I think she's still worried that people blame her for everything that happened." Jake considered that. Margaret's public apology at the emergency board meeting had been sincere and comprehensive, but forgiveness was a process, not an event. Some neighbors had embraced the change immediately. Others were still working through their feelings about the months of tension and division. "People need time," Jake said finally. "But they'll come around. Your wife's trying to make things right, and that matters." Harold nodded. "She's different now. Softer, I guess. The fire scared her, but losing the house, that actually freed her from something. All those years of worrying about property values and perfect appearances, none of it mattered when it was all gone." It was true. The Henderson house had been a total loss, but Margaret and Harold had chosen to rebuild on the same lot. The new house was smaller, more modest, with a wider driveway and mature trees that Margaret had specifically requested. She'd said she wanted a home that welcomed people instead of intimidating them. "Jake." Another voice called from the street. Bill Kowalski was walking over with his wife Linda, both of them carrying covered dishes. "You two are early," Jake observed. "Linda's been cooking since dawn," Bill said with a grin. 3 different casseroles, 2 desserts, and enough rolls to feed the entire neighborhood twice over. "I want to make sure there's enough food," Linda said defensively. "It's been so long since we've all gotten together like this." Jake understood her nervousness. The neighborhood had been fractured for months, divided into camps of Margaret supporters and Jake sympathizers. Tonight's dinner was an attempt to heal those wounds, but nobody was entirely sure how it would go. "The truck looks fantastic," Linda said, admiring engine 419's gleaming exterior. "Did you know the Petersons' grandson is doing a school report on community heroes? He wants to interview you." Jake felt his face warm. "I'm not a hero, Linda. I just did what anyone would have done." "Anyone with a fire truck," Bill pointed out. "And the training to use it. And the courage to risk everything to save someone who'd been in." He paused, choosing his words carefully. someone who hadn't been particularly kind to him. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a black SUV that Jake didn't recognize. The vehicle pulled up to the curb and a woman in her 30s got out, followed by a man with a professional camera. "Mr. Morrison." The woman approached with a confident stride. "I'm Sarah Chen from Channel 7 News. I was hoping we could talk to you about the fire 6 months ago." Jake's stomach dropped. He'd managed to avoid media attention in the immediate aftermath of the fire, partly because he'd been focused on Margaret and Harold, and partly because the story had taken a few days to reach the news outlets. By then, other stories had taken precedence. "I don't really have anything to say," Jake said. "But it's such an inspiring story," Sarah pressed. Retired firefighter saves his neighbor with his own fire truck after that same neighbor had sued to have the truck removed. "Our viewers would love to hear about it." "The story's not about me," Jake said firmly. "It's about a community coming together after a crisis." Sarah wasn't deterred. "But the personal angle is what makes it compelling. The irony of the situation, the transformation of your relationship with Mrs. Henderson." Sarah. Everyone turned to see Margaret Henderson approaching from down the street. She was carrying a large salad bowl and wearing a simple blue dress that Jake had never seen before. Her silver hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail instead of her usual severe bun, and she looked relaxed in a way that would have been impossible 6 months ago. "Mrs. Henderson," Sarah said, brightening. "Perfect timing. I was just talking to Mr. Morrison about the fire, then you were wasting your time," Margaret said calmly. "Mr. Morrison doesn't like to talk about what he did that night." "Neither do I, particularly." Sarah looked confused. "But surely you want people to know about how your perspective changed. About the lawsuit and the reconciliation." Margaret set down her salad bowl and faced the reporter directly. "Miss Chen, do you know what I learned from that fire? That Mr. Morrison is a hero." "No. I learned that some stories are too important to be reduced to sound bites." Margaret's voice carried the authority she'd once used to enforce covenant violations, but now it was directed toward protecting rather than attacking. "What happened that night changed our community. It changed our relationship with each other and our understanding of what really matters. But it's our story. It belongs to us, not to your viewers." Sarah tried one more approach. "But people need to hear positive stories. Stories about forgiveness and redemption. People need to live positive stories," Margaret interrupted. "They need to create their own examples of forgiveness and redemption. They don't need to watch ours on television." Jake felt a surge of gratitude toward Margaret. She was protecting him from something he couldn't quite protect himself from, the reduction of the most meaningful night of his life into entertainment. "I'm sorry you made the trip out here," Margaret continued, "but neither Mr. Morrison nor I will be giving interviews about this matter." Sarah looked at Jake, hoping for a different response, but he shook his head. "What?" she said. After the news crew left, Margaret turned to Jake with a rueful smile. "I hope you don't mind me speaking for you." "Are you kidding?" "Thank you. I've been dreading that conversation for months." "Well, now you don't have to have it." Margaret picked up her salad bowl again. "Shall we head over to the community center? I think people are starting to arrive." The community center was buzzing with activity when they arrived. Tables had been arranged in a large square, with everyone's dishes displayed buffet-style along one wall. The room was filled with the sounds of conversation and laughter, something that had been missing from neighborhood gatherings for far too long. Jake found himself standing near engine 419, which was parked outside the center's large windows. Several children were gathered around it, their parents taking photos and answering questions about what the various equipment was used for. "Mr. Morrison." A young voice piped up. Jake turned to see Tommy Peterson, an 8-year-old with gap-toothed grin and boundless curiosity. "My mom says you used to fight fires with that truck." "I did." "And you saved Mr. Henderson when his house burned down." Jake glanced over at Harold, who was deep in conversation with the Martinezes. "The truck saved Mr. Henderson. I just drove it." Tommy considered this with the seriousness that only children could bring to complex topics. My mom says Mrs. Henderson used to be really mean to you. Tommy. His mother appeared immediately, her face red with embarrassment. I'm so sorry, Jake. He doesn't understand, it's okay, Jake said, kneeling down to Tommy's level.